Hey, welcome to My Mama Summer. My name is Aimee Devlin. I'm an unconventional millennial mother living abroad, building a business and raising children while stepping into who she's meant to be. This podcast is an audio version of my newsletter, which you can find at mymamasummer.com. The episodes are short, wholehearted reflections of my life as a mother, business owner, and everyday human committed to being the best she can be. Pop in your headphones, grab a cuppa and a cookie, and take this time to just be with me. It was the spring of 2021. We had a 10-month-old baby, lived 8 hours north of our closest family, and were looking to find a new rental to move into. Our family had grown from 2 to 3 and was overflowing at the seams of our country home and needed something bigger, more expansive. I felt like my wings had been clipped since I gave birth, and I wanted to fly. However, many people in the cities around Australia had the same idea, and they'd rolled up in droves to our sleepy, small surf town to escape the crunch of the corporatocracy. The preceding year or two had squashed the souls of many Australians. Our country's leaders, and I say leaders in quote marks, were vying head-to-head with Canada's to claim the title of most tyrannical government. And the yardstick was, how many souls can we crush? Families can we devastate? Or lives can we stifle? The answer? Millions, but not ours. Our environment had us feeling meh. We spent nights, the ones that we got together without a delightfully yabbering baby between us, chatting about our future. We did a life audit and asked each other uncomfortable questions that made us squirm, like, what do we want? Not what would we settle for? And did we feel any allegiance to a country that had thrown us under the bus so gleefully? Our life was okay, but we wanted it to be spectacular. We wanted to think bigger and feel alive, not just exist. After realizing we'd outgrown where we were at, that there were no other homes to rent in the region, we'd exhausted our options, and having already scaled the best place to live in Australia mountain, we had to look outside, abroad. Gulp. Where would we go? What would it be like? Who would even accept us? We rolled the dice, and Mexico was the answer. More than a year earlier, at the start of the clown show that was the pandemic, I'd heard someone say to me that Australians, quote, couldn't leave the country. And I thought to myself, that is bullshit. I guarantee people are leaving this country. They have to be letting someone out. Who are they? I just need to find out who they are and how they're doing it. That's how my mind works. So needless to say, when we started to think about leaving the island we'd lovingly dubbed Australia Traz, I'd already researched the loopholes and knew exactly how we'd do it. Remember, this was a time when Australians had to ask the government for permission to leave. Free travel had been deemed unsafe due to the prospect of spreading cooties. And though the government had created the illusion of an impenetrable, unexitable bubble, we applied and were approved for a travel exemption. It took a week or so to find an open-minded travel agent who would help us after we asked them not to fly through the USA and they realized we hadn't injected ourselves with experimental substances. We finally got a flight thinking we'd have an empty plane to ourselves. But when we arrived at the airport alongside, no joke, entire families in hazmat suits, for our final goodbyes, to our dismay, we were met with an airport buzzing with people, all so desperate to get the fuck out. As it turns out, everyone wanted to leave and no one was arriving. Well, I lie. We did meet a French lady in Sydney who was the only human on the plane going into Australia. She had her very own private flight into Oz. I wonder how her internal dialogue sounded when she realised no one else was flying in. So after 4 flights and 74 hours total, 34 of which were in the air, we touched down in our new country, having never been there before. There was no mariachi music or trophy on arrival. Having breastfed my little one the entire time, I felt like a sultana that had been tossed on hot pavers for a few days. I looked like a hobo, and I'm sure I smelt even worse. But we made some friends on the flight, promised to meet up, and headed to our Airbnb to wonder what the heck we'd done. It turned out we'd arrived in Mexico City on the night of a presidential parade. So our taxi driver found a public parking lot, borrowed a luggage trolley from a random dude, stacked our 7 suitcases onto it, and pushed them a kilometre through the city to our accommodation. We gave him a hefty tip. 10 days, an emotional detox, and one bout of Montezuma's revenge later, we finally put our feet on the ground in what was to be our home for almost the next 3 years. It was time to make the most of the life we started living again. We just have to adjust to a different version of beautiful. What we've learned over the past 3 years is this. Though many people have said to us, "Wow, I would love to do what you did," few are committed or crazy enough to burn the boats and choose a life well lived, even when the government shows their hand. So here's what to expect when you move your family overseas. This podcast and its accompanying newsletter serves as a what to expect guidebook for those who may decide to pick up their family and move across the world like we did. Making a decision like this is a leap of faith. You don't know if it'll work out, especially when you've never been to the country before, as was in our situation. But we didn't let that stop us, and you shouldn't either. First, you need to find the strength to choose yourself. When we realised our life wasn't going to work in Australia, it was a bitter pill to swallow for everyone. We'd recently had a baby, the first grandchild for Brennan's parents, and they were besotted with her. Jumping on Zoom for our regular chat and telling them we were seriously exploring options to live overseas ripped their hearts into pieces. We'd previously invited that side of the family to embark on what we thought would be an epic plan to buy an acreage together and live communally, of course with abundant privacy. But that idea went down like a lead balloon. Nobody was ready for that, so we felt compelled to keep dreaming. We'd also spoken with friends about that idea, but most of our friends didn't have the freedom to make that decision in the moment. It was more of a later thing. Aside from the fear of losing their new granddaughter, his parents also feared for us. Was Mexico safe? What would happen if we didn't like it? Was the world situation going to improve or get worse? What if we got stranded and they couldn't visit us? Why did we choose somewhere so far away? It all happened so fast for us that we didn't have much time to explain our choices to anyone or to give ourselves time to back out. It was a leap of faith that felt right, so we pressed purchase and booked our flights 1 month out from leaving. We spent the next few weeks ferociously stuffing moments of our lives into suitcases and boxes or selling them. Worse still, tossing them in the bin. It was a rollercoaster of emotions, excitement, doubt, dread, and everything in between. Mark Twain says, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbour, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. So we did. Moving countries involves adapting to an entirely different world, to a new terrain. Given the timing of our move, we experienced a deep emotional recalibration. Though we hadn't spent the years of the pandemic glued to the news and following orders, we felt a deep sense of relief when the underlying noise had dissipated. We didn't have to fight anymore, even though we didn't think we were fighting. The soup of despair and uncertainty had greatly affected our nervous systems. When we removed ourselves, we could finally exhale, at least until it was time for the next terrain adaptation. Though our flight, which was actually 4 separate flights, spanned 74 hours, it felt like one endless day. We didn't know up from down, day from night. All we wanted to do was arrive and sleep, but we couldn't. Our jet lag was savage, having gone from Australia to Dubai, to Spain, to Mexico. It took 10 days to stop waking in the middle of the night, which was super fun to experience with a baby. Little bit of sarcasm there. And then came the food. Different microbes inhabit different terrains. Brennan's body picked up some new friends who started fighting for the territory, cleaning out his body from both ends. We've since learned from a friend, Francis, that going on a diet of plain rice for 10 days when moving is a really great way of avoiding this transition. So that could be a good tip for you if you're considering this. So at this point, trapped in an apartment in Mexico City, with fluids exiting from all angles, a language barrier, and a cute babbling child wondering what all the fuss was about, we both questioned our decision more than once. The familiarity of Australia Traz seemed very appealing at this point, but our helpful landlord sent Floritil, electrolytes, and a herbalist to make a healing brew. Brendan came back from the dead, and it was time to press on. There was no going back now. Let's talk about emotional disturbances. It may come as no surprise to learn that moving means giving up the life you made at home and not knowing what your new life involves. You create a gap. Naturally, this brings emotional events along with it. Friendships and networks suffer. We've had to work hard to keep home connections alive and allow others to fall away. Some are on pause and we know we'll pick them up again later. The good news is all goodbyes end with a new hello. And what we've found is once you find them, those new friendships are often deeper and more robust because they're built on intention, not circumstance. When leaving, I didn't feel an urgent need to tell my family. They were already scattered across the globe and we didn't talk much anyway. But when I did finally tell my mum, which was too late, she flew off the handle into an emotional wreck. And later I realized I'd unconsciously left it as long as I could to tell her because I knew she wouldn't be happy. Though we didn't live close and rarely saw one another, she wished she had more time to process the news before we left the country. Her reaction broke me, but I had to keep going. There was no time to stop. I really looked forward to telling my nan and hoping she would teach me some Spanish, having lived in Mallorca for a decade. But her reaction broke me even more. She hasn't uttered a word to me since we left. We also experienced a number of online acquaintances, supporters during our activist days, lash out at us for, quote, abandoning Australia at its time of need. They were projecting their thoughts, fears, and beliefs on us. And this was something we were unprepared for, but with hindsight is understandable. Not everyone is courageous enough to leap for their dream life, and they'll try and hold back those that are. Have you ever heard that saying about crabs in a bucket holding each other back? We experienced that firsthand. Disappointing our family and friends was one of the hardest parts of it all. We learned that sometimes growth means choosing to disappoint others, and also that the alternative, trying to prevent others from being hurt, is not an option either. Choosing what we deemed best for our new family, even though it caused pain, suffering, grief, and disconnection, was a choice we had to make. Let's talk about the cultural differences. One of the most obvious shifts when moving countries is the culture. For us, that meant learning a new language. And interestingly, years earlier, I'd started to learn Spanish on an app called Duolingo, just for fun. So I knew all of about 20 words when we decided to make the move. We chose to move to an area with many expats, not because we didn't want to learn Spanish, but because we wanted a longer time to learn it. These days, my ear is pretty good. I can understand a conversation pretty well. Brendan has more luck speaking, so together we do okay. We're like a complete human. Our daughter, however, has left us in the dust. We ask her how to say words in Spanish, and she loves to mock us and say, "Look how fast I can say Farmacia Guadalajara, Mummy," while I hang my head in shame. One of the biggest cultural changes for me has been the food. We were spoilt in the northern rivers of Australia where we lived. We had grass-fed and finished beef, biodynamic chicken, organic vegetables, tropical fruit, and we bought all of our groceries from our local market or organic store. I read all the labels. I never bought anything with seed oils, preservatives, gluten, or all of the usual nasties. Here, I've lightened up a little, actually a lot. Partly because I'd starve if I didn't, and also because many things just are not available here. Also, not driving makes a massive difference to the ability to stock up. And you know what? I've survived, but I haven't thrived. I've really felt a dip in my health since being here. And this is one of the reasons we're about to make another life upgrade, as I shared last week. If you missed that episode, go back and check out episode 6. When you move somewhere new, you need to spend time finding all the comforts of your old place. Things like food, groceries, schools, friends, healers, nannies, cleaners, and of course a house. And being the foreigner takes some getting used to, and it will probably feel strange until you integrate. At least it did for us. Let's talk bureaucracy. When we left Australia, we knew we'd have to organise Mexican residency. The embassy was closed due to the clown show, so we took a punt on sorting it out when we arrived, knowing we had 6 months on a tourist visa on arrival. Now, 6 months sounds like a lot of time in advance, but it's not. It goes super fast. Thankfully, Mexican bureaucracy is easier to deal with in many ways than its Aussie counterpart. If you need something like a residency card or a driver's license, the old adage, it's not what you know, but who you know, is truer than true here. We are now temporary residents, and in a couple of years' time, we'll have permanent Mexican residency. Now, dealing with Australian banks and government departments from overseas is much harder. Time differences, downloading apps, jumping through hoops which seem to have been put in place just to piss people off is all part of the process. That's one of my most hated things that I still have to deal with. Moving on to personal growth. Due to our decision to move overseas, we've condensed decades of growth into a matter of years, and that's evident when we speak with people back home, keen to learn how their lives are, but their response is that nothing's changed. It's all same. It totally blindsided me how tough it is to witness people staying in the same place while I grow. And I don't say that from a judgmental place. It's just really tough to convey the amount of growth required to choose the path we have and how much that changes you. There's definitely a reverse culture shock. We'll never be able to go back to how it was. We've changed so much, and that's not easy to swallow or easy for others to understand. A lot falls away when you reach for your dreams. It results in a feeling of not knowing where we belong. Are we still Australian? Are we Mexican? Where will we end up? What is life in Australia even like now? Would we fit in there after living overseas? Are our friends still our friends? Are we the enemy now? There are no answers to these questions, and we need to be okay with that. We'd likely expect Australia to be the same as it was when we left. Likewise, our friends will expect us to be the same as we were when we left. But we'd both be wrong. I read an article which said that expats returning home, aka repatriates, are shocked into the realization that they have in fact changed substantially. They usually find this when they encounter their home culture upon repatriating. Both they and their home culture have changed, and this is often the first time that expats have had the opportunity to experience any of these changes. Take, for instance, a recent email I received from a real estate agent from the town we used to live in, and it was sent in error to us. Maybe it was the universe pointing out to me how much Australia has changed. So the email was asking us permission to bring potential tenants for an inspection in a home we briefly lived in 2020. When we lived there, the rent was $525 a week. In the rental listing, it was $850 a week, which is a 61.9% increase in rent in less than 3 years. So it's no wonder people are worried about the rising cost of inflation. In my work as an online business mentor, I speak with families all the time about creating an extra income. If you'd like to learn more about that, episode 4 is a really great way to do that. And so many people are struggling to cover their living costs despite working long hours and minimizing expenses. We're living in a bit of a bubble here in Mexico where people still complain about the rising cost of living, but they're remarkably lower in comparison. Reducing our cost of living wasn't the reason that we moved, but it's definitely a massive benefit. To give you a little bit of context on that, our rent here in Mexico where we live in a 3-bedroom, 3.5 bathroom home is currently about 249 Aussie dollars per week. And we're about to move to one of Mexico's most expensive cities and increase that to about $700 per week. So that is way cheaper than the other house that we were living in briefly in 2020 in Australia. What we'll get for that $700 per week here is dramatically more than we'd get in Australia. This is a gorgeous home in a prestigious neighborhood with a rooftop, 4 bedrooms. It's mind-blowing. So that's another one of the benefits. But as I say, moving across the world is not for the faint-hearted. It results in huge growth that comes with the loss of all your usual support systems. There are no relatives and friends to help in difficult times until you find them. You have to take on the mindset that challenges equal opportunities. Having said that, we have made a diverse network of beautiful friends since we've moved. And as I mentioned earlier, they're often richer, deeper friendships based on substance. These friendships are a delight that I'll treasure forever, and I know one day we'll look back and marvel at this time in our lives. Some of the other unexpected delights that we have had along the way have been simple things like receiving a parcel from home in familiar Australia Post packaging. So Brennan's mum sends us regular gifts for our little one, and she usually includes Aussie things that make me feel a little bit homesick. There's Eric the emu, which is a little stuffed toy with heaps of personality. She's sent us a series of books by a lady called Eva Marie Welsh, and these are books about wombats, tree frogs, echidnas, Aussie animal friends taking over the world. And all of the cards she sends have an Aussie touch that I really appreciate. Meeting Aussies abroad is another delight. We're few and far between here in Mexico, so it's really cool when we come across someone who has an Aussie accent and we can lean into the lingo for a little while. I never thought I'd say this, but how's it going, mate? Has a charming ring to it when you haven't heard it for a while. And because we've lived in a place where most expats are from the US or Canada, we've found ourselves adjusting our English vocab so people understand us. We're relearning English as well as Espanol. Nappies become diapers. Footpaths become sidewalks. Petrol becomes gas. Arvos become afternoons. And avos become arvos. It's all very confusing for everyone involved. But what about Spanish? So nappies or diapers are pañales. Footpaths and sidewalks are banquetas. Petrol or gas is gasolina. Arvos or afternoons are tardes. And avos or avocados are aguacates. Just ask our 3-year-old. She's got it down pat. Speaking of which, we are so grateful she's growing up with such a rich experience of culture and language, and I'm really curious to see, as she grows, where she feels she belongs. She's benefited so much already from this blend of Australia and the state of Jalisco, where we've lived for the last 3 years, and soon to be Guanajuato. Making such a life-changing decision isn't easy, but it's definitely enriching. So if you're thinking about doing something similar, I'd say go for it. I wouldn't change it for the world. I love to just end with a quote by a lady who I found online. Her name's Alexis Cedergren. This is in response to being asked what happens when you move your family abroad. And she said, "It's crazy. It's terrifying. Your life as you know it will change forever. You'll be excited about your new life, but homesick for the one you left. And at times it can be really, really hard to adjust. But like it or not, your new country will become and will forever stay a part of who you are." I feel exactly the same way. And as I said, if you're thinking about doing something similar, go for it. If you enjoyed this episode and like reading as much as you do listening, I would love to welcome you as another subscriber to my newsletter. Head on over to mymamasummer.com to subscribe and let me know what you loved most about this episode. I love hearing your feedback. It's my favorite part of sharing what's on my heart. I'll see you over there. Have a beautiful day.